The original Sony Ericsson Xperia Arc was released in 2011 with quite a lot of hype and fanfare, and it certainly impressed me when I reviewed it, and I gave it a solid 3 out of 5 last year. And despite my initial concerns that it was very much a phone that puts style over substance, I praised it for its high quality display, its camera, and its good call quality. So now Sony Ericsson have taken Apple's cue in releasing an updated version of their phones with a suffixed S. So this is the Sony Ericsson Xperia Arc S, a slightly upgraded version of the original. But the problem is that since the launch of the original Arc, the Android landscape has shifted significantly with the launch of Android 4.0 or Ice Cream Sandwich, which has taken the operating system to a whole new benchmark. Now, can the Arc S keep up with this, or does it get left behind? Now, the original Xperia Arc was a good looking phone when we first came across it last year, but the danger with fashion phones is, well, no, fashions change. Now I'm reviewing the white version of the Arc S, and I'm pleased to say that the new or the slightly updated color scheme probably does enough to keep it looking fresh and new. You know, I actually think it looks pretty good, because when you power off the device, the white trimmings contrast quite nicely against the dark black retro futuristic display to give it a bit of 80s retro chic, which I quite like actually. You know, it's got exactly the same unique shape as the original Arc, which was actually quite comfortable in the hand, with the contouring resting quite nicely on the palm. And it's still a pretty unique and nice looking phone. It's got a nice balanced feeling in the palm of your hands with a weight of 117 grams. Now, one thing that I wished Sony Ericsson had changed was the choice of materials. It still feels as plasticky and ever so slightly cheap as the original, which sort of goes against the image that we're trying to achieve with the phone. You know, it's a high-end, in terms of image anyway, it's a high-end phone, but as soon as you touch it, you feel, well, it feels, to put it mildly, slightly cheap in terms of the choice of materials. It's very plastic. I just wanted to rip off the back cover just to demonstrate the plasticiness, and you'll see how thin and wobbly the back cover is. You know, you're certainly not going to like peeling off the back cover very often, because it reminds you of the slightly less than stellar choice of materials that Sony and Ericsson have chosen for the phone. But I guess it does the job. Now, the 480 by 854 4.2 inch LCD Bravia display is quite impressive in terms of its vibrancy and its color saturation. It's also a nice size, not being too small but not being overwhelmingly too big either. Now, here are just some sample images that I've downloaded. And I'm sure you'll agree that head-on it's a fairly impressive display. Not as good as Super AMOLED, but still quite impressive nonetheless. Now, the disappointment for me is that the viewing angles at which the display looks great is quite limited. So if you tilt the device for about 120 degrees, I'm not sure how well this is made out in the video, but for me it washes out pretty significantly at about 120 degrees. Now, I don't think this was a problem on the original Arc, because when I reviewed it I made the point that colours only washed out at about 160 degrees, which was quite an extreme angle, and it's probably one that you could live with. But on the Arc S, they seem to wash out at quite a narrow angle, and I don't know what Sony Ericsson have done to make this the case, but it's certainly one area that the Arc S is probably slightly weaker than its predecessor. The Arc S's OS is Android Gingerbread version 2.3.4, overlaid with Sony Ericsson's Timescape UI. Now, when I reviewed the original Arc last year, at that time I thought the Timescape overlay on Android was dated, and in about the year that's occurred in between, I probably haven't changed that. You know, if anything, it's dated even more, especially when you compare it to Ice Cream Sandwich, which looks ultra sleek and ultra sexy. I think that Timescape is looking rather dated, and that probably Sony Ericsson should probably lay this one to bed for now. The processor has been upgraded to 1.4 gigahertz. The original was at 1 gigahertz, and although this isn't, you know, heaps and bounds ahead of the original was certainly no slouch in itself, and you're certainly not going to notice any performance issues on the Arc S, despite, you know, not being a dual core or even quad core now compared to the Galaxy Nexus processor phone. You know, indeed it runs all apps pretty well. Now, something that Sony Ericsson seemed to have rectified on the Arc S is indeed the keyboard. You know, I wasn't that impressed with the original keyboard on the Arc. I found it inaccurate, and basically downloaded an Android Market replacement as soon as I could. Now, I wasn't expecting great things from the Arc S's keyboard, but to be fair, I've used it for about a week and I haven't got all that frustrated with it. Certainly not to the degree that I got frustrated with the original, so that was a good sign. You know, I still think that there are better Android Market replacements out there, but you know, for me, if it doesn't annoy me, then it's probably doing a decent job. You know, let's just test out how accurate it is. You know, that's pretty decent. Probably the only mistake I've made there is because of the awkward typing angle that I'm performing this side because of the camera tripod here. So, thumbs up. This is something that the Arc S is certainly better than its predecessor on. On the hardware side, the phone has retained the 3 Android buttons at the bottom of the phone, which I liked, and it's got a nice touch in terms of the LED lighting between the 3 there. The only issue with these is that because the screen is quite sizable, you'll often find yourself struggling to reach the bottom of the phone where they're at. But at least, you know, they give a good hardware click when you click on them, so you're 100% sure that you've pressed them, which I like. On the left of the phone here, so running through the silver decor, is the 3.5mm headphone jack. Now, I'm not sure that the left or any of the sides of any phone is a good place to put the headphone jacks, simply because when you've got headphones plugged into them, they stick out a bit, and it doesn't feel that all that streamlined when you're putting it into your pockets. But you know, it's decent. It's certainly no deal breaker. Nothing much on the bottom other than a microphone and a couple of lanyard slots. And on the right, you've got your micro USB charger, volume keys, and the camera shutter button. You know, thumbs up for Sony Ericsson for retaining the camera shutter button. Although it is fairly small, I have to say, it's better than having none. And the top of the phone has a slot, a flap for the micro or mini HDMI port, as well as a power or unlock key. Now, that's pretty small. And one thing that I didn't like about the phone is that because the power or the lock button is so small, there are occasions when you just want to lock the phone quickly and you can't, because A, it's so hard to find, and B, it's quite difficult to press. It might sound like I'm nitpicking, but imagine how many times in a day you actually lock and unlock your phone, and that can prove frustrating. On the plus side, this is a bit flashy, and it's sort of replicating what the latest generation of Android phones can now do, but when you lock it, it has a nice sort of analog effect in terms of trying to replicate an old TV set, which is quite nice. Now, one strength that the Arc S has inherited from its predecessor is the excellent camera. You know, it's still got an 8 megapixel sensor with an LED flash and autofocus. You know, and it produces quite excellent stills, I found, with good color saturation and good color reproduction. The camera shutting button does work quite well once you've found it, and it enables you to take photos quite quickly without having to wait too long. So you can see now that I'm taking snap after snap after snap without too much delay, which is great. Now if we switch to video mode, the Arc S produces fairly decent 720p HD videos, although the outputs don't seem to be as sharp as they could be. But one thing I did notice was that the autofocus is pretty good. You're probably not going to be able to make this out very clearly on this video, but the autofocus on the video recording is quite functional. You know, it effortlessly focuses on near and far objects with some quite excellent macro focusing. Have a look at the linked video that I've got on the right hand side of the page to see a sample video. You know, in summary, given the high benchmark that the cutting edge latest Android phones have set recently, you know, I wasn't honestly expecting a lot from the Arc S, although I did like the predecessor. You know, I initially thought that the combination of a slight technical upgrade compared with an unevolved Timescape UI, which was dated for its time, to be honest with you, would leave the Arc S eating the dust of its competition before it even been released. However, I did find that I did enjoy using the Arc S, and there's been some crucial improvements to the camera and to the keyboard, although it's taken slight steps back in terms of the poorer viewing angles of its screen. Now I've just got to plead with Sony Ericsson or Sony as they'll be known going forward, just to please hire more premium quality materials with their high-end handsets, because I think they're trying to exude an image of high quality, high end, and they certainly look high end and high quality and premium, but when you pick them up, they certainly don't feel it. Now, and if they did, I think, you know, that the Arc S line or the Xperia line could be right up there in terms of the high-end premium Android phones. Now, as it is, it's a very decent, usable Android handset, although not top-end, but not bad at all.